The Civil War reshaped the United States in ways that are still felt today. In our first video, we visited the graves of some of the most well-known figures of the conflict. Today, we continue the journey, visiting the final resting places of 40 more generals, leaders, spies, heroes, and rebels. George H. Thomas, the Union general known as the Rock of Chickamauga for his legendary stand that saved the Army of the Cumberland from total destruction, died March 28, 1870, age 53, buried at Oakwood Cemetery in Troy, New York. Thomas was a Virginian who chose the Union over his home state, a decision that brought him both glory on the battlefield and lifelong estrangement from his own family. Despite being one of the most effective commanders of the entire war, he remains far less remembered than many of his peers, and his quiet grave in upstate New York reflects the modesty of a man who cared more about duty than fame. John Bell Hood, the aggressive and controversial Confederate general who commanded the Army of Tennessee during its final devastating campaigns, died August 30, 1879, age 48, buried at Metairie Cemetery in New Orleans, Louisiana. Hood lost the use of his arm at Gettysburg and his leg at Chickamauga, yet kept fighting with an intensity that both inspired and alarmed those around him. His grave in one of the South's most beautiful cemeteries honors a man whose personal courage was never in question, or even when his battlefield decisions were. Joseph E. Johnston, the senior Confederate general who commanded forces in multiple major campaigns and clashed bitterly with Jefferson Davis over strategy, died March 21, 1891, age 84, buried at Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland. Johnston served as a pallbearer at the funeral of his old rival William Sherman and reportedly caught the cold that led to his own death by refusing to wear a hat in the rain, saying that Sherman would not have worn one if the roles were reversed. His grave is a meaningful stop for anyone drawn to the complicated relationships forged by war. Braxton Bragg, the hard-nosed Confederate general who commanded in major Western theater campaigns and was widely disliked by his own officers, died September 27, 1876, age 59. Buried at Magnolia Cemetery in Mobile, Alabama. Bragg remains one of the most polarizing figures of the war, a man whose tactical shortcomings were matched only by his inability to get along with the men who served under him. His grave in the old Gulf Coast port city is a thought-provoking stop for students of Civil War command and the cost of poor leadership. Joseph Hooker, the Union general who led the Army of the Potomac to a humiliating defeat at Chancellorsville despite holding overwhelming numerical superiority, died October 31, 1879, age 64, buried at Spring Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati, Ohio. Hooker was bold, brash, and confident, qualities that served him well as a division commander but proved disastrous when he was handed the top job. His grave rests in one of the most scenic cemeteries in the Midwest. It is a dignified setting for a general whose reputation never fully recovered from a single catastrophic battle. George B. McClellan, the cautious Union general who built the Army of the Potomac into a powerful fighting machine but could never bring himself to use it decisively, died October 29, 1885, age 58, buried at Riverview Cemetery in Trenton, New Jersey. McClellan was adored by his soldiers and loathed by Abraham Lincoln for his refusal to press the attack, a tension that defined the early years of the war. He later ran against Lincoln for president in 1864 and lost, and his grave in New Jersey holds the memory of a man who was brilliant at everything except the one thing that mattered most. Abner Doubleday, the Union general who fired one of the first shots in defense of Fort Sumter and later commanded troops at Gettysburg, he died January 26, 1893, age 73, buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. Doubleday is often incorrectly credited with inventing baseball, a myth that has stubbornly persisted for more than a century, despite having no basis in fact. His grave at Arlington honors the real man behind the legend, a steady and reliable officer who served faithfully through some of the war's most critical moments. Daniel Sickles, the flamboyant Union general who made one of the most controversial decisions in the entire war by moving his troops forward without orders at Gettysburg, died May 3, 1914, age 94, buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Before the war, Sickles had murdered his wife's lover in broad daylight in Washington and been acquitted on one of the first successful temporary insanity defenses in American legal history. He lost his leg at Gettysburg and later donated it to a medical museum, which he reportedly visited from time to time. His grave holds one of the most extraordinary and outrageous lives of the Civil War era. Albert Pike, the Confederate general, poet, and prominent Freemason who commanded Native American troops in the Indian Territory, died April 2, 1891, age 81. Buried at the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. Pike was a towering intellectual figure who spoke multiple languages and wrote extensively on law, philosophy, and Masonic ritual. He remains one of the most unusual and multifaceted figures of the war, and his resting place inside the Masonic Temple is one of the most distinctive and unexpected burial sites associated with the entire conflict. John Brown, the fiery abolitionist whose raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859 sent shockwaves through the nation and helped set the stage for the war that followed, died December 2, 1859, age 59, executed by hanging in Charlestown, Virginia. Buried at John Brown Farm in North Elba, New York, in the shadow of the Adirondack Mountains. Brown was either a righteous martyr or a dangerous zealot, depending on who you asked, and that debate has never fully been settled. His grave in the remote upstate wilderness is one of the most historically charged resting places in all of New York. John S. Mosby, the daring Confederate cavalry commander known as the Gray Ghost for his ability to strike Union forces and vanish into the Virginia countryside, died May 30, 1916, age 82, buried at Warrenton Cemetery in Warrenton, Virginia. Mosby's partisan raiders operated behind Union lines with devastating effectiveness, and his elusiveness drove his enemies to fury. After the war, he stunned the South by becoming a Republican and supporting Ulysses Grant, a decision that made him a pariah in his own region. His grave is a fascinating stop for anyone drawn to the complicated loyalties of the post-war era. Jubal Early, the cantankerous Confederate general who led a daring raid on Washington, D.C. in 1864 and came within sight of the Capitol dome before being turned back, died March 2, 1894, age 77, buried at Spring Hill Cemetery in Lynchburg, Virginia. Early was one of the most aggressive and outspoken commanders in Lee's army, and after the war he became a leading voice of the Lost Cause movement, shaping how the South remembered the conflict for generations. Bidus Nortan Pradesho. His grave in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains honors a complicated and deeply unapologetic figure. David Farragut, the first admiral in the history of the United States Navy and the Union hero of Mobile Bay, died August 14, 1870, age 69, buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York. Farragut's famous order at Mobile Bay became one of the most celebrated moments of the entire war and cemented his reputation as one of the boldest naval commanders America has ever produced. His grave at Woodlawn sits among many of the greatest names in American history, a fitting resting place for a man whose courage under fire was unmatched on the water. Stand Watie, the Cherokee leader and Confederate general who holds the distinction of being the last Confederate general to surrender at the end of the war, died September 9, 1871, age 64, buried at Polson Cemetery near Grove, Oklahoma. Watie led Cherokee forces in the Indian Territory and fought fiercely long after the major armies of the Confederacy had laid down their arms. His grave is a rare and historically significant site that connects the story of the Civil War to the complex and often painful history of Native American involvement in the conflict. Alexander H. Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederate States of America and one of the most prominent political figures of the secession era, died March 4, 1883, age 71, buried at Liberty Hall in Crawfordville, Georgia. Stephens was a frail and sickly man who nonetheless wielded enormous political influence before, during, and after the war. He later served as governor of Georgia, and his grave at his former estate is a significant stop for those studying the political leadership of the Confederacy. Mary Todd Lincoln, the deeply private and often misunderstood First Lady who stood beside Abraham Lincoln through the darkest years of the war, died July 16, 1882, age 63. Buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois, alongside her husband. Mary endured the assassination of her husband, the death of 3 of her 4 sons, and years of public scrutiny and private grief that would have broken most people. Her grave beside Lincoln is one of the most visited sites in the state, and a powerful reminder of the personal cost the war inflicted on those closest to power. Benjamin Butler, the controversial Union general and political figure who earned the nickname Beast for his heavy-handed occupation of New Orleans, died January 11, 1893, age 74. Buried at Hildreth Cemetery in Lowell, Massachusetts. Butler was one of the most polarizing figures of the war, despised in the South and distrusted by many in the North, yet his actions regarding the treatment of escaped slaves as contraband of war helped push the Union toward emancipation. His grave is a thought-provoking destination for those who understand that the line between villain and visionary was often impossibly thin. Judah P. Benjamin, the brilliant Confederate cabinet member who served as Attorney General, Secretary of War, and Secretary of State during the conflict, died May 6, 1884, age 72. Buried at Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, France. Benjamin fled to England after the war and built a remarkably successful second career as a leading barrister in London, before eventually being laid to rest in one of the most famous cemeteries in Europe. His grave in Paris is one of the most geographically unexpected Civil War resting places in the world. Patrick Cleburne, the Irish-born Confederate general known as the Stonewall of the West for his tenacious defensive fighting, died November 30, 1864, age 36, killed leading his men in the catastrophic assault at the Battle of Franklin, buried at Maple Hill Cemetery in Helena, Arkansas. Cleburne controversially proposed arming enslaved men and offering them freedom in exchange for military service, a position that cost him any chance of further promotion. His grave honors one of the most talented and forward-thinking generals the Confederacy ever produced. Montgomery Meigs, the Union quartermaster general whose extraordinary logistical abilities kept the Northern armies fed, clothed, and supplied throughout the war, died January 2, 1892, age 75. Buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, the very grounds he helped transform into a national burial site by ordering Union soldiers to be interred on the former estate of Robert E. Lee. Meigs remains one of the most important and least celebrated figures of the war, and his grave at the cemetery he helped create is one of the most historically layered resting places in all of Arlington. Robert Smalls. Robert. The enslaved pilot who commandeered a Confederate military vessel in Charleston Harbor and sailed it to freedom in one of the most daring escapes of the entire war. Died February 23, 1915, age 75. Buried at Tabernacle Baptist Church Cemetery in Beaufort, South Carolina. After the war, Smalls served multiple terms in the United States Congress and became one of the most important black political leaders of the Reconstruction era. His grave in the low-country town he loved is one of the most heroic and historically significant resting places connected to the Civil War. Lew Wallace, the Union general who fought at the Battle of Shiloh and later became one of the most famous American authors of the 19th century, died February 15, 1905, age 77, buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in Crawfordsville, Indiana. Wallace's Civil War record was mixed, but his novel Ben-Hur became one of the best-selling books of the century and was adapted into one of the most celebrated films in Hollywood history. His grave is a unique destination where military and literary history converge. Joseph Wheeler, the diminutive Confederate cavalry commander who later returned to serve the United States as a general during the Spanish-American War, died January 25, 1906, age 69, buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. Wheeler was one of the most aggressive cavalry leaders in the Confederate Army, and his later service under the American flag made him a powerful symbol of national reconciliation. His grave at Arlington honors a man who fought under 2 flags and served both with distinction. Wade Hampton III, Pilas Prat, Borifu, the wealthy South Carolina plantation owner who became one of the most effective Confederate cavalry commanders and later served as governor and United States senator, died April 11, 1902, age 84, buried at Trinity Cathedral Cemetery in Columbia, South Carolina. Hampton was one of the richest men in the pre-war South and gave up nearly everything for the Confederate cause. His grave in the heart of the state capitol honors a figure who shaped South Carolina politics for decades after the war ended. John B. Gordon, the charismatic Confederate general who rose from an inexperienced captain to one of Lee's most trusted corps commanders, died January 9, 1904, age 71, buried at Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, Georgia. Gordon was wounded multiple times in combat and bore the scars across his face for the rest of his life. But after the war, he served as governor of Georgia and United States senator, and his grave in Atlanta is one of the most visited Confederate resting places in the Deep South. John C. Breckinridge, the youngest vice president in American history, who later became a Confederate general and Secretary of War, died May 17, 1875, age 54, buried at Lexington Cemetery in Lexington, Kentucky. Breckinridge ran for president in 1860 as the candidate of the Southern Democrats, and when war came, he crossed the lines to join the Confederacy, a decision that cost him everything he had built in American politics. His grave in the Bluegrass State honors one of the most tragic and conflicted figures of the entire era. Newton Knight, the Mississippi farmer who led a remarkable armed rebellion against the Confederacy from within its own borders, died February 16, 1922, age 84, buried at Knight Cemetery in Jasper County, Mississippi. Knight and his band of deserters and Unionists declared the Free State of Jones, an act of defiance that challenged the myth of a unified South. His grave is one of the most unusual and thought-provoking Civil War resting places in the entire region. Albert Sidney Johnston, the senior Confederate general who was killed leading a surprise attack at the Battle of Shiloh in one of the bloodiest days of the entire war, died April 6, 1862, age 59, buried at Texas State Cemetery in Austin, Texas. Johnston was considered one of the most gifted military minds in the Confederacy, and his death on the first day at Shiloh was a blow from which the Western Confederate Command never fully recovered. But his grave in the heart of Texas is one of the most historic military resting places in the entire state. Don Carlos Buell, the cautious Union general who commanded the Army of the Ohio during the critical early campaigns in Kentucky and Tennessee, died November 19, 1898, age 80, buried at Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri. Buell's slow pace of advance and his reluctance to pursue retreating Confederate forces frustrated Lincoln and ultimately cost him his command. His grave in one of the great Victorian cemeteries of the Midwest holds the memory of a general whose caution may have cost the Union months of progress. Zachary Taylor, the 12th President of the United States and a veteran of the Mexican-American War whose military career helped shape many of the officers who would later lead both sides of the Civil War, died July 9, 1850, age 65, buried at Zachary Taylor National Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky. Taylor trained, mentored, or fought alongside many of the men who would become the war's most important commanders, and his influence on the generation that followed makes his grave a meaningful starting point for anyone tracing the military origins of the conflict. William Quantrill, the notorious Confederate guerrilla leader whose raiders terrorized the Kansas-Missouri border with some of the most brutal violence of the entire war, died June 6, 1865, age 27. His remains have had a complicated history, with portions buried at multiple locations including Dover, Ohio, and Higginsville, Missouri. Quantrill's raid on Lawrence, Kansas resulted in the massacre of nearly 200 civilians and remains one of the darkest chapters of the conflict. His scattered burial sites reflect the chaos and destruction he left in his wake. Robert Anderson, the Union officer who commanded Fort Sumter when the first shots of the Civil War were fired in April 1861, died October 26, 1871, age 66, buried at West Point Cemetery in New York. Anderson was a Kentucky-born officer who chose the Union and found himself at the very center of history when Confederate guns opened fire on his garrison in Charleston Harbor. His grave at West Point honors the man who held the fort where it all began. Sam Davis, the young Confederate courier who was captured behind Union lines and hanged as a spy at the age of 21 after refusing to reveal his sources, died November 27, 1863, age 21, buried at the Sam Davis home in Smyrna, Tennessee. Davis was offered his freedom if he would name the person who gave him the information he carried, but he chose death instead, saying he would rather die 1,000 deaths than betray a friend. His grave is one of the most emotionally affecting sites connected to the war. William Cushing, the bold Union naval officer who sank the Confederate ironclad CSS Albemarle in one of the most daring small boat raids of the entire war, died December 17, 1874, age 32, buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis, Maryland. Cushing was just 21 years old when he led the nighttime torpedo attack that destroyed the heavily armed vessel, an act of courage that earned him national fame. His grave at Annapolis honors one of the war's most audacious and fearless young officers, Alexander Augusta, the Union Army surgeon who became the highest-ranking black officer in the military during the war and later the first African-American professor at a medical school. Died December 21, 1890, age 65, buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. Augusta faced relentless discrimination throughout his service, yet he persisted and opened doors that had been closed to black physicians for generations. His grave at Arlington is a profoundly important site honoring the intersection of military service, medicine, and the long struggle for racial equality. Winfield Scott, the towering United States Army general whose Anaconda Plan became the strategic blueprint for Union victory even though he was too old and infirm to lead the fight himself, died May 29, 1866, age 79, buried at West Point Cemetery in New York. Scott had served in uniform since the War of 1812 and was the most decorated American soldier of his generation. His strategic vision shaped the entire course of the war, and his grave at the academy where so many Civil War commanders were trained is a fitting tribute to one of the most important military minds in American history. Benjamin Franklin Cheatham, one of the Confederate Army's most capable division and corps commanders in the Western Theater, died September 4, 1886, at age 66, buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Nashville, Tennessee. Cheatham fought at Shiloh, Stones River, Chickamauga, and the devastating Battle of Franklin, where his corps suffered catastrophic losses in one of the war's most tragic assaults. His grave in the Tennessee Capitol honors a soldier who saw as much hard fighting as any general on either side.